Well, let's get into the news of the day. Joining me now is Sky News host James Morrow. James, the Labor government seems to have received a last-minute rebound of support in the final news poll of the year out in The Australian today. Their primary vote lifting 2 points to 33% in the past 3 weeks. The coalition's fallen to 36. And on the two-party preferred, Labor's now leading 52-48. Which is pretty much identical to the result of the federal election in May 2022 last year, which was 52.1 to 47.9. Are you surprised to see a little bit of a rebound after a pretty ordinary couple of months?
Oh, look, they've had an absolute shocker, Caleb. I mean, the last 3 months have just been pretty horrendous for the government. There's no question about that. I think that going into the holidays, though, I think probably a bit of that uplift can be attributed to just the fact that people are starting to switch off a bit from the day-to-day news and the political cycle. And the best thing, you know, that Anthony Albanese can do for his polls is to shut up. And he's been on leave the last week. So that may very well be part of the reason why his poll numbers have lifted again. You know, I wouldn't read a huge amount into that uplift going into the holiday period, though, just simply because people aren't dialed in to the political cycle like they would have been, you know, 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks ago.
Yeah, and I know the AFR had it 50-50 as well today, but he's got an uphill battle next year when the rubber will really have to hit the road on things like cost of living. Now, we know about airbrush elbow, but the Prime Minister is now being dubbed airbrush elbow for skipping out any reference to his failed Voice to Parliament referendum in his 2023 recap. Now, he posted this 2.5-minute video on X, no mention of the Voice, but he did make time to mention a few other highlights. Take a look.
2023, the Matildas inspired a nation. Australians dominated Hollywood. Vegemite turned 100. It's been a big year.
Vegemite turned 100, James. Voice, what's that?
Well, you go, you little beauty there, Vegemite. But I'll tell you what, Caleb, there's something really interesting about all those things in that grab that you played there. He had nothing to do with them. You know, those aren't any of the things that the government did. Now, you know, it's interesting because the Albanese government is, when you talk to his office, you know, they're very keen to spruik their list of accomplishments, achievements, reforms, this, that, and the other thing. But it's pretty glaring that they didn't even mention it. And there would have been a really artful and tasteful way I think they could have mentioned it, acknowledged it, you know, said the country debated this, but it just looks like a glaring sort of omission. And it does suggest to me that, you know, they want to just sort of memory hole the whole event, when I think really that's the sort of defining moment of this government, because ever since then, they've had a hard time holding a line on anything, whether it's, you know, the Voice or Israel or any number of other issues.
Well, the PM's just seemed really deflated, I think, ever since the Voice lost, which I don't think he needs to be, because politically the Voice losing was not the end of the world. It wasn't an issue that people really gave that much of a toss about, that it was going to cost him in the long term. But I think it's really dragged him down in his own head. And speaking of someone who often looks like they've been dragged down, the new Queensland Premier, Stephen Miles. He's got to be one of the most uncomfortable premiers I've ever seen on camera. But he's unveiled his new ministry today. And interestingly, gone is Anastasia Palaszczuk's obsession with the Olympics. There's no more dedicated minister for that role. Instead, he says there's going to be a greater focus on crime. Smells like an election coming, eh?
Well, look, call it an election, call it reality. You know, the fact of the matter is that crime, especially youth crime in the regions and in places like Townsville, is absolutely out of control. And this is going to be the defining issue. And you know, look, I think the Labor government there is one for the high jump. I don't think that they've got a huge chance of getting back in. I think the opposition in Queensland has been doing a very strong job, and a job that I think, you know, their counterparts in New South Wales and Victoria can learn a little something from. But that said, Caleb, you know, this crime issue is really it's the sort of thing that makes or breaks governments, and rightfully so, because people want, you know, this is basic quality of life stuff, and states are responsible, not the feds. The Palaszczuk government dropped the ball massively on this. People in Townsville and places like that are terrified. You know, the number of carjackings, ram raids, all sorts of things like that. And of course, the justice system there, Caleb, is completely messed up, because for youth crime, detention, the magistrates are told, by the law has to be the last resort. And so, you wind up with people back out on the streets time and again, offending and reoffending. The cops know who's doing it, but they can't keep them locked up and keep everybody else safe.
But this issue of youth crime in Queensland, it's been big for ages. I've been talking about it as long as I've been on Sky News. It must be 4 or 5 years now. Nothing has changed. If this bloke can turn it around, I tell you what, he'll definitely get re-elected because no one else has managed to do it. And speaking of things not going so well, how can this bloke get away with this? The Australian High Commissioner to the UK, Stephen Smith, who of course was the man who last week caused an uproar because he wanted to axe Australia Day events in the UK because of the cost. Oh, think of the money. Turns out he just spent $670,000 of taxpayers' money on renovations for his residence in London. I know he's been overruled on this Australia Day stuff, but did he really think he was going to get away with this?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure he did. I mean, he's only sorry that he got caught. And this is always the way it is with bureaucrats and political appointees and things like that. But, it does point, I don't want to be so hard just on Stephen Smith over this one issue, because there is a much bigger issue, I think, on the culture of DFAT itself and where it sees itself and how it considers that it represents Australia's interests. And I think that you'll find that an awful lot of people in DFAT are very reticent, I think, to defend Australia's interests, advocate for Australia. And, this sort of confusion, we saw the controversy around the paintings in the embassy, the High Commission in London earlier this year. There's a number of issues there that go, I think, beyond just the man who's in the chair.
Now, James, before I let you go, you're obviously a Yank. I hope you don't mind me saying that I might be up in front of HR.
You've outed me here.
For some sort of racial slur now. And I know you enjoy travelling as well. So if you happen to be back in the US soon, maybe you should fly with Southwest Airlines, because if you are a passenger of size, as they're calling it, you can request a complimentary seat, up to 2 seats, so you can get a full row to yourself to accommodate your girth. I mean, can I just identify as a passenger of size and get a whole row to myself? Sounds brilliant.
Well, look, I don't know, Caleb, and I'm, not exactly sure what you're implying here about, my holiday diet. And it's not even Christmas or New Year's yet. But look, Southwest is not a preferred carrier for myself when I'm in the United States. I'll just, say that. And the bit of travel advice I always give people, particularly when they're flying internationally, is never turn right.